A single glove. Out of place. And suddenly, everything unraveled. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. I'm always curious. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop it in the comments. Your messages bring these stories to life. Let's uncover it. It was one of those gray New York mornings that made coffee taste like salvation and the Times obituary section read like prophecy. I was at my desk, dodging the monthly wrestling match with Wolfe's orchid budget, when the doorbell buzzed. Fritz was in the kitchen sautéing something that had a future appointment with Wolfe's digestive tract, so the honors fell to me. The woman on the stoop was about 40, looked younger, and wore a fitted navy coat with a turned-up collar and one red glove. The other hand, bare, held a folded umbrella like a rapier. I've got a sharp eye for accessories. I date women after all, and that glove was expensive. Lambskin probably, but it was the color mismatch that registered first. Fire engine red on one hand, nothing on the other. "You're Mr. Goodwin," she said. Not a question. Her tone was cool and composed, like a cello that knew how to play one note well. I nodded and let her in. "Come on inside, miss." Camilla Vardas. She stepped over the threshold, like it owed her an apology. I led her into the front room, but she didn't look around. Most people do, especially first-timers. The books, the globe, the chairs. She kept her eyes forward. Not rude, deliberate. "You're in luck," I told her. "Mr. Wolfe is vertical. He'll be horizontal by noon, so speak fast." "I'll speak carefully," she said. "It's not my speed that matters, it's yours." I raised an eyebrow at that but said nothing. After a quick ring to the office intercom, Wolfe responded with the kind of grunt that meant he was willing to be annoyed if necessary. Inside, Wolfe was settled in his chair, surrounded by the order he valued more than gold. He glanced at her glove, or lack thereof, with the same vague interest he'd give to a weather forecast in Bolivia. But I've worked for Wolfe long enough to know when his brain has already made room for a curiosity. That glove had gotten in. "You are Miss Vardas." "Camilla Vardas. I'm a freelance consultant in executive communications, mostly corporate conflict mediation. I'm also in trouble." Wolfe closed his eyes halfway. "A conflict you failed to mediate, I presume?" "Not exactly. It's something missing, and something planted." "Miss Vardas," Wolfe said, shifting his weight no more than a crocus shifts in spring. "We are neither locksmiths nor fumigators." She smiled faintly. "I didn't say it was in my apartment." "Archie." "Then where?" "In my client's boardroom." That got him. Not a twitch, mind you, but he opened his eyes. "Continue," he said. "There was a strategy session last week, confidential. 4 people in the room. One of them is accusing another of theft. Digital and personal. There's a glove. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't there before." "Glove?" I asked. "Singular?" She held up her red-gloved hand. "Mine are in pairs. This one doesn't match." Wolfe breathed in through his nose. "Miss Vardas, I dislike corporate intrigues. They are rarely rational and always tiresome. And yet," she said, "someone made it a personal message." The glove showed up in my briefcase. The files I was carrying, internal profiles, confidential notes, were tampered with. But only one section was deleted. About someone I used to know very well. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "You're not here for restitution." "No," she said. "I'm here because whoever did it wants me to know it was them, and doesn't want me to tell anyone else." I gave Wolfe a quick glance. He gave me nothing back. She set the red glove on the edge of his desk. "You may not like corporate games, Mr. Wolfe, but someone has made this a different game entirely." Wolfe looked at the glove, then at her. "Very well," he said. "I will take the case." I blinked. He didn't ask the fee, didn't probe for the client's name. That meant one thing. He already had a reason. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Okay, what's the hook?" Wolfe didn't look at me. "Archie, if you would bring Miss Vardas a glass of water, then retrieve the casebook." I gave him the look he'd learned to ignore over the years. The case had begun. Wolfe was still sitting. The glove hadn't matched. And something told me by the time it was over, neither would the stories we were about to hear. I brought Camilla Vardos the glass of water Wolfe had ordered, then sat down with the casebook, ready to take notes. She didn't touch the glass. Instead, she smoothed her skirt like she was wiping away fingerprints. No one else could see. Wolfe, meanwhile, hadn't moved a muscle. That was expected. What was unexpected was how quickly he'd taken the case. Usually it took either a direct insult to his routines or an outrageous fee to stir him. This time it had been a glove and a sentence. "This item," Wolfe said, nudging the glove on his desk with a pinky, "is meant as both message and evidence. Someone went to deliberate effort to place it where it would provoke you, but not implicate themselves. That suggests cunning, not impulse." Camilla nodded. "I thought the same. But it's the why I can't get to." Wolfe gave me a look. "Then we shall proceed from the outside in. Archie, the names." I lifted my pen. "Let's start with the client. Jonathan Rowe, CEO of Stratic." She said it crisply, like she was used to introducing him at panels or interviews. I wrote it down. Tech, finance, or something vaguer. Organizational analytics. They build behavioral tracking software for leadership training. It's not glamorous, but it's profitable and sensitive. Who else was in the room during this strategy session? Wolfe asked, his voice neutral but narrowing. "Rowe, of course. Then Maren Ellis, she's their legal counsel, and longtime board member. David Kellner, the new CTO. And me. Anyone else with access to that room, or to your briefcase after?" I asked. She hesitated. A personal assistant might have crossed paths with it, but no one should have had a chance to open it. The glove wasn't there when I left the meeting. It was when I got home. "What about the deleted material?" Wolfe said. "What precisely was lost?" "A section of my client analysis on Kellner. I build psychological profiles, privately for board reference only. This deletion was surgical. Just enough to imply someone didn't want that section seen, but not enough to trigger alarms. And Kellner is the one you knew." Camilla's gaze dropped to the floor. "Yes. Years ago, briefly romantic. We hadn't spoken in years before he appeared at Stratic. The deletion was personal. But the glove is either a warning or a lure." Wolfe made a small sound, somewhere between a grunt and a sigh. "I detest riddles that masquerade as strategy. It lacks honor." I knew what that meant. The case now had philosophical appeal. Wolfe's peculiar moral compass didn't spin wildly. It always pointed to intellectual clarity. He despised manipulation masked as logic, especially when it entered his house in the form of a red glove. "Miss Vardos," he said, "you have given us a narrow lane with steep walls. Let us begin by widening it. Mr. Goodwin will call on this Mr. Rowe first, tactfully. I want to know whether this incident is known to him or if it is still hidden under the rug." Camilla opened her bag, pulled out a slim envelope, and handed it to me. "A visitor's pass. Stratic doesn't appreciate drop-ins. I've added you to the schedule under the title of external auditor." "Appreciated," I said, tucking it into my jacket. "Anything I should know before I go knock?" She hesitated. "Then, Rowe likes control. His instincts are clean, but his vision's clouded by power. He'll talk, but only if he thinks he's shaping the conversation." Wolfe raised a brow at me. "Your expertise in theatrical diplomacy should suffice." I grinned. "You make it sound like a compliment." By the time I stepped into Stratic's lobby that afternoon, the weather had decided to drizzle on everything but the honest. The building was glass and metal, sleek and sterile, with just enough money behind it to make you feel like you didn't belong, unless you already did. The receptionist smiled like it was in her contract, and checked my ID against her screen. 5 minutes later, I was upstairs, ushered into Jonathan Rowe's office by an assistant who looked like he'd been raised on spreadsheets and protein powder. Rowe was standing at the window when I entered, one hand in his pocket, the other tapping a stylus against his palm. Tall, lean, Good suit, gray with a black shirt underneath. Understated wealth, trying not to look like money. You're the auditor, he said without turning. We have plenty of those. What are you auditing? An interaction, I said. Last week's meeting. The one with Miss Vardos, Ellis, Kellner, and yourself. That got a turn. He looked me over like I was a riddle with an invoice. I wasn't informed we were being reviewed. You're not. Not officially. I'm just here to ask a few clarifying questions off record, off paper, and with no billable hours. A courtesy. He crossed to his desk. Camilla sent you. She did. I thought we'd moved past this. His tone was tightrope balanced between irritation and concern. Past what? He tapped his stylus again. The Kellner issue. There's tension. Camilla has history. David has ambition. Ellis doesn't trust either. It's the triangle no one asked for. But now we've got to balance on it. That tension include any items going missing. He hesitated. Just enough to count. I heard about a mistake in a file, he said. Camilla mentioned it privately. She said it was fixed. No mention of a red glove. That stopped him cold. A glove? Left in her bag. Not hers. Doesn't match anything she owns. Any of that sound familiar? His jaw worked once. She didn't tell me that. Maybe she didn't want you alarmed. Or maybe she didn't want me asking the wrong questions. Such as? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Here, he said. These are the summary notes from that meeting. Nothing sensitive. You'll see who talked and when. You'll also see that no one left the room for more than a minute. I scanned the folder. Neat bullet points, carefully massaged summaries. Professional, but too clean. The kind of notes you prep in case someone ever does what I was doing. Thanks, I said, tucking it under my arm. You mind if I talk to the others? Off the record, I do, but you'll do it anyway. You mind telling me what's really going on? Rowe leaned forward. Someone in that room is playing a deeper game than I can see. And if Camilla brought you in, it means she's scared, which is rare and dangerous. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was, as expected, in his chair. Fritz had already served beer, chilled to the point of sacrilege. I gave Wolfe the notes and the visitor pass. He ignored both, naturally. Tell me. I did. Wolfe listened with eyes half-lidded, the red glove still on his desk like a dare. When I finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, we must meet Ellis and Kellner, and before we do, we must determine what Camilla Vardos left out. I nodded. You think she lied? No, Wolfe said, but she sculpted the truth. The deletion was precise. That glove was symbolic, and Miss Vardos is accustomed to controlling narratives. I want to know the one she's controlling now. Should I call Saul? Not yet, but prepare him. The next intrusion will not be metaphorical. That gave me a pause. You're expecting one? I'm counting on it, Wolfe said. And with that, the brownstone began to listen for the next footstep out of place. The next morning began with scrambled eggs, a whispered complaint from Fritz about the parsley quality at Ruggiero's market, and an unspoken truce between Wolfe and the rain, which had for once stopped pelting the house like a debt collector. At 9:15 I was back at my desk, sorting the notes from Rowe's folder. Wolfe was in the plant rooms upstairs, communing with his orchids, and I was in the middle of deciphering one of Rowe's bullet point euphemisms, discussion regarding digital redundancy protocol, which I suspected meant Ellis told Kellner to stop rewriting code in secret, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Maren Ellis herself. She was early 40s, angular in posture and precision, and carried a leather folio that looked like it might bite if handled improperly. Her expression was less, "May I come in?" and more, "You're expecting me." Which of course we weren't. "I don't have an appointment," she said. I gave her a grin. Neither did influenza when it hit New York in 18. That doesn't mean it wasn't significant. She didn't smile. "May I speak with Mr. Wolfe?" I stepped back. "You may," he may not speak back. "But come on in." She followed me to the office with a gait that didn't waste time on uncertainty. Wolfe was in his chair by then, just returned from the orchids, and in the process of buttering a piece of toast like it had personally offended him. "Marian Ellis," I said, ushering her to the red chair. Legal counsel, Stratic board member, and early riser. She sat, legs crossed, folio on her knee. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't know what Camilla has told you, but I'd rather speak to the facts than the feelings." Wolfe lifted one brow, then put his knife down with deliberate care. "So would I." That was Wolfe's way of signaling that you had exactly one chance to be useful before you were dismissed, possibly into non-existence. Ellis adjusted her cuffs. "There's a conflict within Stratic that will not stay internal much longer. David Kellner is pushing for a software overhaul that Rowe didn't authorize. Camilla supports him unofficially. I suspect their history informs her judgment." I objected, loudly. I glanced at Wolfe. Nothing but eyelids and toast. "Camilla claims someone tampered with her notes. I believe that, but she's wrong about the motive. This isn't personal sabotage. It's a corporate maneuver." Wolfe interlaced his fingers. "And the glove?" Ellis frowned. "I heard about that late last night. From Camilla. Indirectly. I find it dramatic." "She didn't dramatize it. She delivered it," I said. "Even so," Ellis replied, "you must see how convenient this all is. Camilla finds a glove. Camilla finds a deletion. Camilla also has a history with the man she's profiling. That's not sabotage. That's guilt management." Wolfe finally leaned back in his chair. "Miss Ellis, have you come to offer insight or accusation? I came to tell you that if you continue investigating Stratic as if it were a stage play, someone will get hurt, and not theatrically. Is that a warning?" I asked. "It's a fact," she replied. "I deal in facts." Wolfe made a humming sound. "And when those facts become unfriendly, I handle them." She stood, snapped her folio shut, and gave Wolfe a curt nod. "I know Camilla hired you. Just remember who's footing the real bill." After she left, Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. Then, "She is intelligent, defensive, and frightened. Frustrated. Maybe. No, Archie. Frustration does not compel a lawyer to break habit and protocol and appear unannounced in a man's home before breakfast. Fear does." I crossed my arms. "You think she's the one who did it?" "I think she knows who did it, and hopes we do not." At 11:30, I made the next stop in the social tour, David Kellner. His office was all brushed steel and masculine geometry. He greeted me like I was either a threat or a math problem. Mid-30s, too polished for a coder, too impatient for a politician. He smiled like he'd been practicing it in reflective surfaces. "I've read your books," he said as he shook my hand. I blinked. "You have." "Not you, Wolfe. You're the sidekick. Glad to know where I stand." He motioned for me to sit, then leaned against his desk. "Camilla sent you." "She did. She thinks someone sabotaged her notes." "Someone did. Possibly you." He laughed. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Only other people's." Kellner's grin faded. "I didn't touch her files. And if I had, it wouldn't have been subtle. I don't do delicate. Did you see anything strange at that meeting?" "You mean besides a lawyer and a strategist trying to run tech decisions?" "Anyone touch her briefcase? Step out of the room. Have a red glove hanging out of a pocket?" That last one hit. He didn't flinch, but the air changed slightly. "Glove?" he asked. I nodded. "Red. Leather. Left in her bag. I wear gloves in winter. Brown. Leather. That's as close as I get." "Ever date her?" His eyes narrowed. "A long time ago. Not relevant. I think the file deletion suggests otherwise." "I think you're in over your head." He stood, crossed to the door, and opened it. "If you're still sniffing around here tomorrow," he said, "you might find more than a glove. You might find a trail." That wasn't a threat. It was a breadcrumb. Back at the brownstone, I recounted the meetings. Wolfe listened in silence. then lifted the glove off his desk and examined it with the same attention he'd give a rare orchid with an odd bloom. Then he said, "Saul Panza. You want him?" "Yes. I want him to follow David Kellner. Quietly. I suspect he will not stay silent much longer." I made the call. "Also," Wolfe added, "I want you to contact Camilla. Invite her to return tomorrow evening. For a gathering. For a prelude." He closed his eyes. "This is not about code or gloves or even files. This is about control, and one of them intends to seize it permanently." I didn't ask what he meant by that. I didn't have to, because right then, Fritz entered the room. "There's been a break-in," he said. Wolfe opened one eye. "Where?" "Your orchid room. Someone's been inside." The brownstone had been breached, and Wolfe was no longer merely curious. He was now engaged. Fritz, who typically treated any form of disorder like a personal insult, stood in the doorway pale and rigid, his hands gripping the sides of his apron like reins. "In the orchid room," he repeated. "This morning, I just noticed the slat on the northeast shelf was crooked, and one of the spray bottles was moved." "You would not have done that." Wolfe, who had about as much tolerance for floral meddling as he did for cold soup, opened his eyes fully, described the disturbance. Fritz took a breath. The misting bottle was moved approximately 5 inches from its designated position, and there is residue on the terracotta tiles, a light smear of something clear, possibly oil. I stood. "You're sure it's not just you being overzealous?" Fritz gave me a look that could curdle Bernays. "I have been in charge of that room for 17 years. No tool ever moves without intent. No residue appears without cause. This is intrusion." Wolfe's gaze drifted to me. "You will inspect. You will inspect." He meant now. 10 minutes later, I was in the orchid room. It smelled like it always did. Damp, lush, and unreasonably expensive. Fritz hovered at the doorway, his hands clasped like he was expecting last rites to be administered. I spotted it quickly. The bottle of neem oil had indeed been nudged. But more importantly, there was a scuff mark, small, faint, but there, near the base of the wooden table, a dark smudge of something greasy. I leaned down, sniffed. Not oil. Something synthetic, like solvent. "Anyone else been in here today?" I asked. Fritz shook his head with scandalized precision. "No one but myself. I entered at 7:45, left at 8:17, returned just now. That stain was not there before." I straightened. "Okay. So someone got in without using the front door, or left no trace doing it." Fritz muttered. Back in the office, I gave Wolfe the details. He didn't react. Not immediately. That was always worse. When he did speak, it was quiet. "Someone entered this house without permission and tampered with my plants. You think they left something? A device? Bugged it?" "No. That would require a purpose. This was not purposeful." I blinked. "You're saying it was accidental?" "No," Wolfe said. "I'm saying it was symbolic." He glanced at the glove, still on his desk. "Miss Vados's briefcase. My orchid room. These are private sanctuaries. This intruder is telegraphing sophistication, not just of access, but of restraint. They want us to know they can infiltrate." I poured myself a glass of water and didn't bother with ice. "So what's the message? That we are not in control." "Except we are," I said. "We're the ones asking questions. They're reacting." "No, Archie, we're still orienting ourselves. Someone else is controlling the pace. And pace in strategy is power." "Saul's tailing Kellner," I reminded him. "If Kellner makes a move, we'll know. And if Kellner is merely a piece," Wolfe murmured, "then someone else holds the board." At 5:30, Saul Panza called. I put it on speaker, since Wolfe had no intention of touching a phone unless it was a rotary and belonged to Caesar. "David Kellner left Stratic at 4:12, Saul said. Took a cab to Midtown, walked 2 blocks south, made a phone call from a payphone. Yes, an actual payphone, and waited across the street from a coffee shop. Anyone meet him? Wolfe asked. A woman. Short, grey coat, scarf, hat. He passed her a manila envelope. She gave him a slip of paper. Then they parted. He went back toward the east side. What did the woman do? She went into the coffee shop, ordered a tea, and left 5 minutes later. I followed her. She headed into the elevator at a private co-working space on 5. Could you get a name? Not yet. But the desk guard called her Ms. There was silence. Wolfe's eyes met mine. Thank you, Saul, he said. Remain in position. I hung up. Vardos. Too obvious, Wolfe said. No woman hires me to investigate a threat, then engages in covert exchange with the very person she suspects, unless she's deeply conflicted or deeply deceptive. She said she hadn't seen Kellner in years. She also said her files were tampered with to protect him. So which is it? That, Archie, is the question, and we must ask it with precision. We didn't have to wait long. At 7:01, Camilla Vardos returned to the brownstone. She was dressed the same as before, composed, elegant, but with an edge around her mouth that hadn't been there yesterday. You called for me, she said. I did, Wolfe replied. Please sit. She did. I offered tea. She declined. Wolfe didn't waste time. You met with David Kellner today. Camilla blinked once. Yes, that surprised me. Wolfe, less so. I wanted clarity, she said. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure what it would mean. What did it mean? Wolfe asked. I asked him what he wanted. He said nothing. I gave him a copy of the unedited file, my version. He gave me a name. A name? I asked. She nodded. The person who deleted the file originally and who left the glove. Who? Marin Ellis. That made the room tilt slightly. You're sure? Wolfe asked. That's what Kellner said. And it fits. Marin always hated our involvement. She thinks I protect him out of sentiment. And she has access, legally and otherwise. She also visited us, I said. Uninvited, told us not to look too deeply. Camilla's eyes flicked to me. Then she's frightened. No, Wolfe said. She's something worse. She's overconfident. He stood. Yes, stood. Slowly, deliberately. It was a rare moment, like seeing a statue take breath. I will summon all three of them, he said. Tomorrow evening. Here, in this room. You will attend. Camilla looked at him. You think you can make her admit it? No, Wolfe said. But I can make her explain it. And Kellner? I asked. Wolfe sat again. He will watch, and reveal more in silence than words ever could. Camilla stood. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. He didn't reply. After she left, I turned to him. So you believe her now? Wolfe closed his eyes. I believe none of them. But I do believe the pattern. Tomorrow, the mask will slip. And when it does, I will be watching. And so would I. The next day, the brownstone was primed like a trap set by a botanist, deliberate, quiet, and full of patience. Wolfe had instructed me to prepare the front room, tidy the office, and make sure Fritz understood that tonight's dinner would be postponed until after the Inquisition. That's what I called it. Wolfe called it a clarification session. By 6:30, everything was in place. The chairs were arranged with surgical symmetry. The desk had been cleared, save for Wolfe's casebook, a single manila folder, and the red glove which he'd set precisely in the center, like a dare or a relic, depending on your interpretation. At 6:45 sharp, the doorbell rang. I answered. Marin Ellis stepped in first, her gray suit crisp, her expression tighter than a drum. I assume this is necessary, she asked. Only if you value answers, I said, which for a lawyer is at least 40% of the job. David Kellner arrived 2 minutes later, smelling faintly of cologne and passive aggression. I'd ask if this was standard, he said, but I know better. You don't play by standards, you invent them. Credit where due, I said. Wolfe's the architect. I'm just the doorman and occasional instigator. Camilla Vardos came last. She was subdued tonight. No umbrella, no sharp edges, just a dark blouse, her hair down, and an air of fatigue so expertly disguised it almost looked like composure. I led them into Wolfe's office one by one, each taking their seat with wary glances at the others. Wolfe, of course, was already settled in his oversized chair. His lips pursed and his gaze somewhere just beyond the edge of the room. He waited until the silence became uncomfortable. Then he spoke. "You are here because your words and actions no longer align." That got them quiet. Even Kellner, who looked like he'd come prepared to spar, sat back slightly. "I will speak briefly," Wolfe continued. "Miss Vardos hired me to investigate a symbolic act, an intrusion paired with a message, a red glove placed in her private briefcase. She believed it was intended to warn her or manipulate her. What she failed to anticipate, what you all failed to anticipate, was that such a gesture only gains power when it is observed by someone outside the game." He paused. "I am that someone." Ellis crossed her legs tightly. "We're not in court, Mr. Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said. "In court, you might lie under oath. Here, you will lie without it, but I will still know." I gave her a grin from my post near the door. "And I get to take notes." "Let us begin with the glove," Wolfe said. "Miss Ellis, do you deny placing it in Miss Vardos's briefcase?" She didn't blink. "Completely." Wolfe nodded once. "Then explain the deletion of Camilla's file notes on Mr. Kellner." "I can't," Ellis said. "Because I didn't do that either. Yet you are the only other person with access to both the server and the briefcase location." "I didn't need to sabotage her," Ellis said. "If I wanted her opinion buried, I could have overridden it legally. I'm counsel." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And what of your unexpected visit to me 2 days ago? What compelled you to appear unannounced, without invitation, and imply that further inquiry would cause harm?" Ellis's jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect the company. Camilla tends to personalize conflicts." Camilla stirred at that but didn't speak. Her eyes remained fixed on Wolfe. "You fear what Kellner represents," Wolfe said. "A shift in culture, a challenge to tradition. You feared Miss Vardos's prior relationship would make her blind to danger." "Yes," Ellis said. "And I may have been right." Wolfe turned. "Mr. Kellner, would you say Miss Ellis's suspicions are warranted?" Kellner gave a slow, sarcastic smile. "Depends on whether you think innovation is sabotage. If so, sure. I'm the Trojan horse. Why did you meet with Miss Vardos yesterday?" Camilla's eyes flicked to him. He said she reached out. Said she wanted answers. "And you gave her a name." He didn't deny it. "Because I knew what she wanted to hear." That brought Wolfe to full attention. "Explain." Camilla needed to believe the threat was external, that Ellis was the one undermining her. "It's cleaner that way. Less compromising." I stepped forward. "So you lied?" Kellner shrugged. She needed clarity. I gave her one version. "You manipulated her," Wolfe said. "No," Kellner replied. "I tested her." Camilla finally spoke. "You tested me. You were unsure. I needed to know whether you'd act on that uncertainty or sit with it." Wolfe raised a hand. "Enough. Let us dispense with artifice." He lifted the manila folder and opened it. Inside were the server logs that I'd pulled that morning, after Saul had followed a lead to Stratic's IT department, and encouraged a sysadmin named Brent to cooperate with his conscience. "Miss Ellis," Wolfe said, "on the night of the meeting, someone logged into the internal strategy files using your credentials, but the session lasted only 3 minutes, not long enough to identify, select and delete a targeted profile section." He turned a page. "Mr. Kellner, you logged in an hour later, 21 minutes. A deletion occurred during your session." Kellner didn't move. "I was reviewing code references. You deleted Camilla's profile notes." "I reviewed her notes," he said. "I made an editorial decision. You removed the section that connected your early psychological profile, written years ago when you were briefly involved with new internal behavioral trends, because it was biased, No, Wolfe said, because it was accurate. There was a pause. Then Camilla said, very quietly, "You knew I'd find out. You wanted me to. I wanted you to ask me directly." Kellner said, "Not send a detective, not run scared." "Then the glove?" I asked. Kellner shook his head. "Not mine." All eyes turned to Ellis. Her face was blank. "I didn't place a glove," she said, "and I didn't authorize deletion. But I won't apologize for suspecting you both." Wolfe leaned back. "I believe you," he said, "because I now understand the glove." He gestured toward it. "The leather is not strategic issue, not corporate, and the style is European. It is a man's glove." He looked at me. "Archie?" I nodded. Had Saul traced the origin? Custom made. A pair purchased 6 months ago at Damiani's, on the Upper East Side. Only 2 sold in that color. One to a woman in Chelsea, one to a man named Jonathan Rowe. That landed with force. Camilla's voice came out in a whisper. "Rowe, your CEO," I said. "And the only one in that room. No one accused." Wolfe gave a small nod. "He wanted to test you all and distract you. He planted the glove, watched you fracture around it, and now he knows where everyone stands." There was silence. No one dared speak. Then Wolfe said, "This was not sabotage. It was a calibration." Camilla stood. "What do we do?" "Whatever you like," Wolfe said. "Rowe has not committed a crime, only a manipulation." Ellis rose next. "But it changes things." "Of course," Wolfe said. That was the point. One by one, they left. When the door shut for the last time, Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled. I asked, "So what happens now?" He murmured, "Now we eat." And in the kitchen, Fritz served roast squab with rosemary. Dinner that night was unusually quiet. For a household that had just unmasked a CEO as a Machiavellian puppeteer, Wolfe as ever gave his full attention to the squab. Fritz had outdone himself: crisped skin, perfect salt, and a subtle hint of citrus. I ate in silence too, partly because the food deserved it, and partly because I was still chewing on the case from earlier mentally, not just gastronomically. It wasn't over. Not really. "You're brooding," Wolfe said after the third bite. "I'm reflecting." "Same thing, less efficient." I set down my fork. "We proved Rowe planted the glove, sure, but we still don't know why." He stirred the pot, watched the soup bubble, and then what? Gave himself a pat on the back for corporate surveillance. Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin. "You expect something grandiose. A final twist. You are mistaking complexity for drama." Rowe revealed character. That was his objective. But to what end? "To choose an heir," Wolfe said simply, "or an enemy." I paused. "You think he was picking sides?" "Archie," Wolfe said. Jonathan Rowe knew his board was unstable. He saw Ellis as a protector of legacy, Kellner as the future, and Vardos as a potential wildcard with divided loyalties. What better way to test them than a quiet provocation? A planted glove, a surgically deleted file, nothing overt, just enough to trigger reactions. "So you're saying we weren't hired to solve a crime?" "No," Wolfe said. "We were hired to reveal intention." That wasn't satisfying, but it was true. The next morning, while I was halfway through reorganizing our files, Wolfe insisted the Vardos case be filed under interpersonal strategy, non-criminal. The phone rang. "Archie Goodwin," I said. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Camilla Vardos." She sounded calm. Too calm. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday." "You're welcome. I'll file that under rare moments of client gratitude, but something's happened." I sat forward. "What kind of something?" "Someone left another glove." That was not what I expected. "Where?" "In my car. Driver's seat. Locked vehicle, valet-only garage. No sign of forced entry." "Same glove? Same color? Same stitching?" "The mate to the first, I think." I covered the receiver and called to Wolfe. "We've got another glove." He turned his head slowly. "Continue," he said. I went back to the phone. "Do you still have it?" "Yes." "Touch it." "No." "I remembered your advice." "Smart. Sit tight. We'll be over in an hour." Wolfe, naturally, had no intention of leaving the brownstone, but he was willing to let me violate our perimeter. I arrived at Camilla's apartment building just before 10. Midtown, with a doorman in gloves that cost less than the one I was about to examine. She buzzed me up. When she opened the door, she looked tired, but not surprised. "It was in the car this morning," she said. "I went to retrieve something before breakfast. Saw it. Didn't touch." We walked down to the garage. Her car, a sleek silver coupe, was parked in the corner space. The driver's side door was closed, windows clear, and there on the seat sat the glove. "It's twisted." "Looks like Roe's making a sequel," I muttered. "Why?" she asked. "The game's already played. Maybe he's still watching. Or maybe someone else found the script." I used a handkerchief to retrieve the glove, slipped it into a plastic evidence bag. I kept in the trunk for just such occasions. Yes, Wolfe insists on preparedness, and took a good look at it. Same make, same stitching, no tag, no note. But something bothered me. "Camilla," I said, "when was the last time you spoke with Roe?" She hesitated. "Yesterday, briefly, after I left your house." "Was he upset?" "Calm. He said he was relieved, that everything had fallen into place." "Those were his words?" "Exactly. I didn't like that. Not one bit." Back at the brownstone, I set the new glove beside its partner on Wolfe's desk. He studied them as if waiting for them to confess. "2 gloves," he said. "2 interruptions. One more than expected," I said. "But if Roe made his point, why the encore?" Wolfe looked up at me. "Because someone else delivered this one." "You're sure?" "The timing, the subtlety, the escalation. Roe wanted containment. This gesture is not containment. It is escalation." "You're saying the second glove is a threat?" "I am saying it is a message from a second party, someone who now sees opportunity in the confusion Roe created." I leaned on the desk. "Kellner?" "No. Too direct. Too volatile. Ellis? Volatile. Ellis? Volatile. Too careful." I stared at the gloves. "Then who?" Wolfe was quiet a moment. Then he said, "We must speak with Jonathan Roe. Immediately." "I'll call him." "No," Wolfe said. "You will go, in person." That wasn't his usual order, unless he sensed time was no longer a luxury. I called Roe's assistant. She sounded off, hesitant. "Mr. Roe isn't available today," she said. "He's working remotely." I didn't like the way she said it. "Where?" I asked. "I'm not authorized to give that information." I hung up and looked at Wolfe. "Want me to lean on her?" "No," he said. "Find him through other means. Use Saul if needed. I suspect we're not the only ones looking." It took Saul Panzer 42 minutes. Jonathan Roe was found in his apartment, alone, unresponsive, and dead. Coroner's initial report: cardiac arrest. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. But there was one item out of place: a red glove, on his desk. The third one. Saul called me from the scene. "Roe's dead," he said. "I've already alerted the authorities, but I figured you'd want to know before it hits the wires." I told Wolfe. He nodded, once, like it had been inevitable. "This," he said, "is no longer about corporate maneuvering. Someone has decided to close the curtain entirely." I stared at the gloves. One in Camilla's bag, one in her car, now, one at Roe's death scene. 3 gloves, I said, but only 2 hands. "No," Wolfe murmured. 3 messages, 3 recipients. He pointed at the gloves. 1 for Camilla, 1 for Roe, 1 more to come. I didn't like where this was going. "Who's the third target?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Whoever tries to silence the truth." And that truth, whatever it was was coming for someone fast, which meant we needed to get there first. You said. Section 7, ChatGPT said. Wolfe hated disorder, but what he hated more, though he'd never admit it, was not knowing. When I told him Roe was dead, his expression didn't change much. But I saw the signal, his fingers pressing together slowly, methodically, as if he were counting pulses in the dark. 3 gloves, 1 dead man. And someone still playing conductor. We need to move, I said. If there's a third target, there is, Wolfe interrupted. And they will be contacted soon. Camilla again? No, he said. Camilla was the first warning. Roe was the silence. The third will be the conclusion. That still leaves us blind. No, Wolfe said, not blind. Misled. There's a difference. Retrieve Miss Ellis. Now, it was late, nearly 8 in the evening. But if there's one thing corporate lawyers and murderers have in common, it's that they never truly clock out. I called Ellis at her apartment. She answered on the second ring, her voice weary. You've heard, she said. I have. You think it was Kellner? I think you'd better come over. Wolfe wants to speak to you. I assume I have a choice. Technically, yes. Practically, not if you want to avoid being the next headline. There was a pause. I'll be there in 30. She arrived in 25, trench coat tight, lips tighter. I led her into the office. Wolfe didn't stand, of course. That would have been indulgent. Instead, he gestured to the red chair and said, sit. She did. Roe is dead, Wolfe said. A red glove was found beside him. Her eyes didn't flicker. Then whoever left the first 2 just escalated. Indeed. Is this where you ask me if I did it? No, Wolfe said. If you had, you wouldn't be here. Ellis exhaled, slow and steady. Then why am I? Wolfe tilted his head slightly. Because I believe you were meant to be the third. That stopped her. What? Wolfe's voice was steady. 3 gloves, 3 recipients, each symbolizing a message. The first, to Miss Vardos, a warning not to interfere. The second, a sign of proximity to Roe. And the third intended for the person best positioned to reveal the truth. You. I didn't even know Roe had died until an hour ago. You didn't need to, Wolfe said. Your role was already written. Ellis leaned forward. What do you think is happening, Mr. Wolfe? I think, Wolfe said, that someone used Roe's original game as cover for a much more efficient one. You mean someone piggybacked his glove trick? Yes, and now they're removing witnesses. She shook her head. But why would Roe be the first target? He orchestrated the charade. Exactly. He built the stage, Wolfe said. And once the players stepped into place, he became expendable, especially if someone feared what he might do next. I chimed in. Like name names, or shift blame. Ellis looked down, then back up. You think this is Kellner, don't you? Wolfe didn't answer, but his silence was louder than a gavel. Where is he now? Wolfe asked. I don't know. Call him. Ellis hesitated. If he's behind this, won't that tip him off? That, Wolfe said, is precisely what we want. She pulled out her phone, dialed, put it on speaker. 1 ring, 2, 3, voicemail. She ended the call. He's ignoring me. Or already on his way here. Wolfe murmured. Ellis turned to me. Should we call the police? No, Wolfe said. Not yet. You're serious? If we call them now, he said, we lose the advantage. Mr. Goodwin, go to Kellner's apartment. Observe. Do not engage. If he is there, return immediately. If not, we must prepare. I grabbed my coat and headed out. Saul was already on standby nearby. I called him in transit and gave him a quick update. Meet me at Kellner's building, I said. But hang back unless I signal. I arrived 10 minutes later. Kellner's building was newer, sleeker, more anonymous, designed to keep its tenants private and its entrances monitored. I gave the doorman a confident smile and a fake name. It got me in. Sometimes the best credential is attitude. I rode the elevator up to the top floor. Lights were on under Kellner's door. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. I knocked twice. No answer. Then I noticed something odd. The hallway camera mounted above the exit sign was pointed just slightly off angle. Not enough to seem broken, but enough to miss anyone standing at the door. That was no accident. I leaned in and tried the knob. Unlocked. Against my better judgment, which I'm proud to say I occasionally listen to, I cracked it open. Inside, still silence. Then I heard it. A soft metallic click from deeper inside. I closed the door gently and backed into the hallway. Then I bolted for the stairwell and called Saul. He's there. And he's not alone. Get out. I'm out. Good. I'll follow him if he moves. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe and Ellis were exactly where I'd left them. Her upright, him immobile. He's home, I said. And someone else is with him. Ellis turned to Wolfe. You were right. I am, Wolfe said. Now we must draw him in. At 10:35, the doorbell rang. This time, Wolfe didn't need to say anything. I opened the door. Kellner stood there, looking calm, but too calm. His coat was buttoned. No hat. His eyes scanned the room behind me. I assume I'm expected. I led him in. Ellis stood, arms crossed. You've been busy, she said. Kellner shrugged. So have you. Wolfe's voice cut cleanly between them. Mr. Kellner, you are here because I have deduced what you intended to do and what you failed to finish. Kellner raised an eyebrow. You think I killed Roe? No. You watched Roe die. But you didn't kill him. That would be beneath your sense of theatricality. Kellner gave a little bow. You flatter me. I do not. You've simply been outplayed. That got his attention. Wolfe continued. Someone used your ambition and Roe's manipulations to frame a much larger collapse. They wanted Roe out of the way. You were the misdirection. The gloves, the meetings, the deletions, all of it camouflage. Kellner smiled faintly. And who do you think the real killer is? Wolfe didn't blink. Someone who needed control, who feared exposure, who had access to all systems and knew Roe's schedule. He turned to Ellis. Miss Ellis, you are the only one who fit all parameters. She paled. That's absurd. You altered the logs to make it appear Kellner deleted the file. Wolfe said. But the server time-stamped inconsistency revealed it. Roe discovered the truth and planned to confront you. You knew that. You can't prove. No, Wolfe said. But the red glove found in your office this afternoon by Mr. Panzer and hidden in your cabinet can. Ellis opened her mouth, closed it again, and sat down. Hard. Wolfe closed his eyes. I abhor manipulation, he said softly. But worse than that, I abhor amateurs who mistake cunning for wisdom. Ellis said nothing. The silence was final. Later, when the police came and took her quietly from the house, Wolfe remained still. The gloves sat untouched. The game was over. And this time, even the orchids remained undisturbed. The morning after the arrest, the brownstone was returned to its preferred state of controlled stasis. No red gloves, no uninvited guests, and no orchid violations. Fritz had made pancakes, which Wolfe only tolerated because they were accompanied by blood-orange segments and fresh cream. I wasn't complaining either. It was the first breakfast in days where I didn't feel like someone might leave something ominous on the doormat. Ellis cracked fast, I said between bites. I expected more sparring. Wolfe sipped his coffee. Her strength was procedure, not confrontation. She relied on systems to shield her, not on the fortitude of deceit. Once the system cracked, so did she. I nodded. Still, it was bold. Killing Roe in his own apartment and trying to make it look like natural causes. Not her usual tempo. She was desperate. She saw the storm Roe set in motion and realized her relevance was waning. Kellner represented chaos, Camilla ambiguity. She feared both. Roe, having triggered the chain reaction, was about to make his final move, either by exposing her or by cutting her out. And you think she used the gloves as cover? Of course, Wolfe said. The first glove, planted by Rowe in Camilla's bag, was theater. The second, the mate, introduced later, was Ellis's move, an effort to hijack the narrative and redirect suspicion. The third was planted beside Rowe's body to reinforce the illusion and escalating pattern, not an act of deliberate murder. But the glove found in her office was her misstep. She had no reason to hold on to it, but couldn't bear to discard it. Sentiment or pride. I leaned back in my chair. The part I still can't shake. Kellner. He was a pawn, sure, but he walked right into every setup. That whole business with Camilla, feeding her Ellis's name, deleting the file. It practically handed Ellis a script. Kellner, Wolfe said, was a romantic with delusions of strategy. He believed by protecting Camilla both from Ellis and from the consequences of her own divided loyalty, he could emerge as both savior and visionary. He fed her lies to keep her safe. Precisely. And in doing so, created just enough noise to mask Ellis's true agenda. I tapped the table with my index finger. And Camilla? Camilla was what she appeared to be, intelligent, loyal, and compromised by history. Her only crime was assuming she could remain neutral. We finished breakfast without speaking. Wolfe hated post-case analysis that lingered too long. It was like overwatering orchids. The root rots and the blossom falls. Later that morning, Camilla called. Her voice was different now. Relieved. Yes, but guarded. I just heard, she said. The police found the glove in Marin's office. That's final. For you, maybe, I said. But I imagine the company's going to need more than a new board member to recover from this. She hesitated. Rowe wanted change. He got it. Just not the way he intended. Wolfe knew, I said. Not just who did it, but why Rowe played the game the way he did. There was a pause on the line. You know, in all our conversations, I never asked what Wolfe charged for this. You didn't, I said, and he didn't offer. Should I expect an invoice? No, I said, but you might expect a letter. Wolfe prefers closure on his terms. She laughed quietly. Tell him, thank you. And tell him I'll keep both gloves if no one objects. I'll pass it on. I hung up and relayed the call. Wolfe, of course, only grunted. That afternoon, the papers had a field day. Tech exec, dead after secret office conspiracy. Not exactly accurate, but close enough for the ink-stained wretches on West 43rd Street. They speculated on motives, hinted at scandal, and misquoted Wolfe in a sentence he never actually said. Justice blooms only in the light of reason. He almost smiled at that. Almost. By evening, the brownstone was itself again. The orchids had been misted. Fritz had prepared trout with almondine. And I was on the couch reading a mystery novel whose killer I'd guessed by page 37. As I set the book down, Wolfe spoke. Rowe was many things. Visionary, coward, manipulator. But he was also correct. I turned in my chair. About what? About people, Wolfe said. You can observe them, measure their responses, test their limits. And yet, the moment you think you've controlled them, they change? No, Wolfe said. They reveal themselves. I nodded. Even Ellis? Especially Ellis. Her crime was not murder. It was presumption. She believed herself above consequences, and acted accordingly. And Camilla. She learned, painfully, but sufficiently. He picked up the red glove, still on his desk. The third one, the one from Rowe's desk. She may keep these, he said. They belong to her history now. I watched him for a moment, then stood and stretched. Well, I said, another tidy knot untangled. No bodies in the cellar, no orchids harmed in the process. Archie, Wolfe said. Your standards are too low. Sure, but they're consistent. He closed his eyes and leaned back. I stepped out into the hallway and let the door fall shut behind me. The brownstone was silent again, which, in Wolfe's world, was the only real sign that justice had been served. 3 days passed. 3 days without a red glove, a break-in, or a cryptic client, leaning forward in Wolfe's red chair, trying to calculate how much truth they could afford. The brownstone sighed back into its rhythms. Wolfe returned to his orchids. Fritz resumed experimenting with sources that sounded made up, and I finally started organizing our unsolved clippings file, just for the pleasure of tossing a few into the solved pile. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something in the case hadn't quite settled. Not the Ellis part. Her arrest had been airtight. Not Kellner. He'd accepted Wolfe's assessment of him as a misguided romantic with the same moody silence of a man who knows it's true. No. The part that lingered was the one piece Wolfe hadn't commented on since Roe's death. The game. Because whatever else he was, Jonathan Roe hadn't just been a CEO dabbling in psychology. He'd been conducting a human experiment with high stakes and willing test subjects, including himself. And that glove, the first one, the one Roe had planted in Camilla's bag, was more than mischief. It was bait. On the fourth morning after the case had closed, Wolfe called me into the office. He was seated naturally and sipping a glass of lukewarm beer, as if the taste could somehow reveal a moral flaw. The red glove, the original one, was still on his desk. The others had been turned over to the authorities. This one Wolfe had kept. "You're still restless," he said without looking up. "Can you blame me? The puzzle's solved, but the box is still open." Wolfe grunted. "That is because Roe's death distracted us from a conclusion he had already prepared." I sat forward. "What do you mean?" Jonathan Roe, Wolfe said, was not killed to silence him. He was already done speaking. "You think he knew Ellis was going to kill him?" "No. I think he had accounted for the possibility." Wolfe reached to his side and opened a drawer. From it, he removed a small brown envelope, sealed and unmarked. "This arrived this morning," he said. "Hand-delivered. No return address." I raised a brow. "You opened it." "I did not." "You will not." "You will not." I took it, broke the seal, and pulled out a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. Typed, not handwritten, no heading, no signature. Just 4 lines. To observe is to shape. To act is to expose. To silence is to choose a side. The glove was not the game. It was the mirror. I looked at Wolfe. He wrote this. I believe so. Why send it now? Because he knew we would still be thinking. I paced the length of the room once, then turned. So the glove wasn't about scaring Camilla or misdirecting suspicion. It was a test to see who reacted, how fast, and with how much fear. Wolfe nodded. He wasn't measuring culpability. He was measuring instinct. And Ellis failed. She failed because she believed she was a chess master and forgot she was also a pawn. Roe provoked chaos, but he never intended death. I frowned. So what was his plan? Wolfe steepled his fingers. He wanted to force a reckoning among his closest advisors, his chosen lieutenants. He wanted to see who protected what and why. But when Ellis saw herself exposed, she overstepped. She turned strategy into violence. I exhaled. And you think this message was meant as a code? No, Wolfe said. A confession. That stopped me. You think he knew he'd lose control of the game? I think, Wolfe said, that Roe understood people more deeply than he let on, including his own flaws. And he knew that one of them, Ellis or Kellner, perhaps even Camilla, might eventually overstep. He prepared for it. I looked back at the glove, the mirror. Wolfe nodded. The moment Camilla found the glove, she looked inward, so did the others. It was not a weapon. It was a trigger. Self-awareness by way of suspicion. I sat down slowly. He played all of them. Yes, Wolfe said. And then he accepted the consequence. We sat in silence for a while. Wolfe did that sometimes, ended the conversation without a cue, like he was shifting chapters in his head and the rest of us had to keep up. I stood to leave, but he spoke again. There is a lesson, Archie. I turned. You often admire clarity. I value precision. But Roe's experiment, despite its conceits, offered something neither of us emphasize often enough. What's that? Revelation through choice. I folded the note and slipped it back into the envelope. You're in a philosophical mood today. Wolfe grimaced. It will pass. It usually did. The following day, Camilla Vardos returned. She'd called ahead. Wolfe had agreed to a 15-minute audience, which was extravagant by his standards for a client whose case was technically resolved. She wore gray this time. No red. I won't stay long, she said, once seated. But I thought you should know I'm leaving Stratic. I raised an eyebrow. Jumping off a sinking ship, more like acknowledging it was never built to float. The board's fractured, the damage is deep, and I don't want to fix it anymore. Any plans? I'll consult again. Smaller projects. Maybe something of my own. Wolfe gave a fractional nod. A wise decision. She reached into her bag and produced a thin velvet box, opened it. Inside, resting on black satin, were the 2 red gloves. Too many associations, she said. But I thought they belonged here. Wolfe did not reach for them. He merely regarded them. You may leave them, he said, though I will never wear them. Of course not, she smiled. They're not yours to wear. After she left, I waited a beat. Then asked, why keep them? Wolfe glanced at the box. They represent a complete thought. A crime? A sequence, he said. From provocation to response to consequence. Kind of grim for a pair of gloves, perhaps, Wolfe said. But instructive. That evening after dinner, lamb shoulder with mint and garlic, because Wolfe believed in reward after reflection. I stepped out onto the stoop. The city hummed the way it always did when the weather held and no one had been murdered recently. Across the street lamp flickered twice. A man with a newspaper folded under his arm walked past without noticing me. A cab slowed, then kept going. No more messages, no more gloves. But I did wonder. If Jonathan Roe had lived, what would he have done with what he'd learned? I never asked Wolfe. Some things, even he wouldn't presume to answer. And some stories closed not with a bang, but with a glove, returned to its box, and a chair, finally empty, in a house restored to silence. The end. The first true day of peace came a week later. No visitors. No phone calls. No envelopes sealed with philosophical riddles. The red gloves, now resting permanently in their satin-lined case on the back shelf of Wolfe's office, had been undisturbed since Camilla left them. I suspected Wolfe viewed them the way a geologist regards a fossil, a finished narrative pressed in leather, hardened by time and intention. We were once again men of habit. Wolfe resumed his schedule of rising at precisely 11, spending 2 hours with his orchids, reading the Gazette cover to cover with a half-sneer, and consuming meals that would make kings envious and cardiologists nervous. I spent my mornings fielding mail, cataloging case files, and going through our unsolved clippings with the suspicious glare of a man daring them to try something. But as the days passed, a certain kind of atmosphere began to settle around the house. It wasn't unease. Exactly. It was more like completion. The calm that follows, not just a solved case, but a completed experiment. Wolfe didn't say it, but I could tell he felt it too. Until that Thursday. It was just after breakfast, soft-boiled eggs, sourdough toast and fried tomatoes, when Fritz stepped into the office and cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe. Mr. Goodwin. There's someone at the door asking for you. A young woman. No appointment. Name? Wolfe asked, without looking up from his book. Fritz hesitated. She didn't give one, but she said to tell you she was a friend of Jonathan Roe. That pulled Wolfe's gaze up. He closed the book slowly and looked at me. Shall I? I asked. Yes, Archie. I headed to the door. She was maybe late 20s, maybe 30, wearing a light green raincoat though the sky was clear. Her hair was tied back in a way that said practicality first, but her expression was far from composed. Miss, I said. I'm sorry to intrude, she said, but I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe. I don't know where else to go. Most people come here when something's been stolen, broken, or buried, I said. You'll have to be more specific. She looked me dead in the eye. Jonathan Rowe left me something, and I think it's going to get me killed. That, I admit, got my attention. I stepped aside. Come in. Back in the office, Wolfe had moved nothing. Book still in hand, red gloves still boxed and behind him. He regarded the girl with polite disinterest until she spoke again. My name is Natalie Craig, she said. I worked with Jonathan Rowe 3 years ago. We weren't close then. But about a month ago he started sending me messages, one by one, through dead drops. Sometimes email. Sometimes physical letters. Why? Wolfe asked. I didn't know at first. They didn't make sense. Just bits of code, names I didn't recognize, and phrases, like riddles. Wolfe's brow twitched. Examples? She pulled a folded sheet from her coat pocket. This is the last one he sent. It came 2 days before he died. Wolfe nodded, and I stepped forward to take the sheet, typed like the earlier message to Wolfe. But this one was longer. If they kill me, look for what they denied. If they chase you, it's because you are holding the key. Trust only those who never asked. And if you reach Wolfe, do not lie. He hates being misled. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it twice, then set it beside the gloves. This, he said, is Jonathan Rowe's postscript. Natalie looked confused. What does it mean? It means, Wolfe said, Rowe foresaw his own death and distributed his knowledge to others in the hope of provoking justice. You are not a messenger. You are a contingency. I don't even know what I'm holding. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, have Miss Craig retrieve everything Rowe ever sent her, physical, digital, written, or otherwise. Then return with it here. You will accompany her. Natalie looked relieved. You think I'm being followed? I think, Wolfe said, you're about to be, and I'd rather it happen where I can control the outcome. We left immediately. Her apartment was a modest walk-up in the East Village, 2 flights of creaky stairs, and a hallway that smelled of carpet cleaner and regret. She'd done a good job of hiding the documents, some under floorboards, others in hollowed-out books. There were flash drives, too, one of them inside a disposable razor handle. I didn't know what any of this meant, she said, but I could tell it mattered. We packed everything and made it back to the brownstone without incident. For now. Wolfe spent that evening combing through the data. He called Saul to assist with the digital files, decrypting, decoding, and linking it all into something coherent. At 2:14 a.m., Wolfe rang the office bell from upstairs. I was half asleep in the front room but jolted upright. He was waiting at his desk, red gloves removed from the shelf, and now resting beside the original message from Rowe. Saul sat in the corner, sipping coffee like he'd never needed sleep. I've reviewed everything, Wolfe said. It is not simply data. It is a map. A map to what? To strategy's real secret. Wolfe motioned toward a decrypted email on the screen. It was from Rowe 6 weeks before his death. They believe I started the game to test them. I didn't. I started it to smoke out the leak. Someone has been funneling psychological analysis to an external entity, an unlisted subsidiary operating under an offshore shell. Ellis didn't know. Kellner didn't care, but someone else was directing it. Saul spoke. We traced the shell. Registered in the Caymans. Recently dissolved. The funds were transferred to a private consulting firm. One that, until last year, had a shared board member with Stratic. Camilla, I said. Wolfe nodded. Unwittingly, her name remained attached after her resignation. But she was not involved. She was the camouflage. I sat back. So Ellis wasn't the end of it. No, Wolfe said. She was a participant, but not the architect. Then who? Rowe never found out, Wolfe said, but he left the tools. Miss Craig here has possession of enough documented access logs, board meeting transcripts, and IP traces to ensure the federal authorities will. Natalie looked stunned. I didn't even know what I had. You do now, Wolfe said. I asked, So what happens next? Tomorrow, Wolfe said, you will escort Miss Craig to the FBI's New York office. They will take it from there, quietly, thoroughly, and ideally, completely. Saul stood, and if someone tries to stop us, Wolfe closed his eyes. Then they will discover what happens when games are played with incomplete rules. Natalie left just before dawn, escorted by Saul. I closed the door behind them, turned to Wolfe and said, "You realize the case is technically reopened?" "No," Wolfe said. "It is concluded. Everything after this is epilogue." And the gloves. Wolfe opened the box, looked at them one last time, then closed it. "They were never about fashion," he said. "They were a signature." "Rose?" "No," he said. "Human nature's." He stood, a rare act, and left the room without another word. The brownstone was quiet again, but the world outside, still listening. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that settles on the brownstone after a case closes, like the place exhales. It's not the same silence as late evening, or the post-lunch lull when Wolfe's buried in the Gazette. This one is deeper, heavier, like something was let go, finally. Saul returned the next morning with a brief nod and a receipt for the delivery of Natalie Craig's materials to the FBI. No incident, no chase, no mysterious figures ducking behind lampposts. Just the right kind of silence following the wrong kind of storm. Wolfe took the news with the same expression he uses when the weather forecast aligns with his expectations, faint satisfaction, nothing performative. He didn't ask for details. He never does when he already knows the outcome. Natalie left New York that evening. She called once, just once, to say thank you, which Wolfe declined to take himself. I passed on the message and got a grunt in response, which, in Wolfe's private language, may as well have been a bow. It would have been easy to say that was the end of it. That a killer was in custody, a hidden conspiracy unearthed, a dead man's chessboard cleared. But this wasn't one of those neat endings where everyone gets medals and a digestible motive. This was something else. This was Jonathan Rowe's final move, still echoing through the pieces he left behind. We'd barely resumed our normal routine when Inspector Kramer showed up. No appointment, no warning, just a thundercloud in a rumpled suit parked on our doorstep. I let him in. "You know," he growled, "I'm getting tired of hearing Wolfe's name attached to cases we're supposed to be working." "He didn't commit the crimes," I pointed out. "Just solved them." We sat in the office, me, Wolfe, and Kramer, who looked like someone had force-fed him sour milk and asked him to write a thank-you note for it. "You knew about the Stratic leak?" he asked Wolfe directly. "I deduced it," Wolfe said. "After Miss Craig provided evidence. Evidence you didn't share with us. I informed you that Ellis had murdered Rowe. I did not believe the corporate espionage required your intervention." Kramer bristled. "You don't get to decide that." Wolfe's gaze was steady. "You are welcome to take it up with the federal prosecutors now in possession of the materials. I assure you, they'll thank you for your diligence." Kramer stared at him for a full 10 seconds, then turned to me. "How do you stand working for this man?" "It's the cooking," I said. He left in a huff. Wolfe didn't watch him go. Instead, he turned his attention back to the envelope, Rowe's message, the one he hadn't burned, filed, or framed, just kept resting there. Quietly, as if still being read. After a while, he spoke. Rowe believed in consequences, not punishment, consequences. He manipulated a lot of people to get there. "Yes," Wolfe said, "but not to harm them, to illuminate them. There's a difference." Ellis didn't agree. She reacted as he predicted, perhaps as he hoped. That was his gamble. I thought about that, about Camilla, and how she'd walked the knife edge of loyalty and clarity, about Kellner, who'd fallen into the role of romantic misfit without realizing he'd been dismissed from the stage before the second act, and about Rowe, who in the end had used a pair of gloves not as a disguise, but as a mirror. Was it worth it? I asked. Wolfe looked at me. "The truth always is." I nodded. "Even if no one wants it. Especially then." There wasn't much more to say. Wolfe returned to his orchids, I returned to the files. Fritz prepared veal in mustard sauce with braised leeks. The brownstone resumed its pulse. As for me, I slipped the envelope back into the drawer when Wolfe wasn't looking. Not to hide it, just to remind myself that some puzzles don't end. They echo, and that sometimes the most dangerous game isn't the one played in secret, but the one that shows you who you've always been, when you thought no one was watching. The glove didn't match, but the truth did. And that in Wolfe's house is the only ending that matters.